In 1966, one of the greatest athletes to ever walk the earth was just born, soon to be considered the most feared man on the planet, because of the person he became inside of the ring. And perhaps most importantly, outside of it, what are the philosophies that a man like this possesses that enable him to reach the top so fast? Mike Tyson, at the age of 15, started to study the lives and philosophies of many of the most powerful conquerors, like that of Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and even the many twisted philosophies of Machiavelli. It was no accident he became world champion so fast and dominated for so long. Born in the high-crime neighborhood of Brooklyn, known as Brownsville, Tyson had, it's safe to say, quite a traumatic childhood, with brutal fights being a common occurrence around him. He was the youngest of 3 children, abandoned by his father at the age of 2, putting a lot of pressure on his mother to raise all 3 of them, often leaving them for days at a time, leading to their neglect and malnutrition. At the age of only 13, Mike had been arrested 38 times, with petty theft being a normal part of his day, often being bullied at school, adding an additional layer of insecurity and isolation. He endured abuse by an older man when he was young, a secret he kept out of fear of looking weak. With his mother, Lorna, dying when he had only reached the age of 16, his early life would have undoubtedly helped ignite the fire inside of him. Mike, when talking about his mother, said this: "I never saw my mother happy with me and proud of me for doing something. She only knew me as being a wild kid running the streets, coming home with new clothes that she knew I didn't pay for. I never got a chance to talk to her or know about her. Professionally, it has no effect, but it's crushing emotionally and personally." He was 13 when he started his boxing training with former boxer Bobby Stewart, serving as good practice for the street fights he would often find himself in. After 3 months of being trained by Bobby Stewart, Tyson got introduced to Customato, a famous fighting coach who had helped train greats like Ali, and who really launched Tyson's boxing career. Along with becoming his legal guardian and acting as the paternal figure Mike never had, Tyson caught his big professional break in his debut in 1985, knocking out Hector Mercedes in the first round at the age of 18. Arguably, one of Mike's biggest successes came later in his career when he fought Michael Spinks in 1988. Both held impressive fighting records, with Tyson at 30 for wins and 0 losses, 30 of which were knockouts, and Spinks having a record of 31 wins and 0 losses, 21 of which were by way of knockout. The fight was viewed as a once-and-for-all matchup to decide the real heavyweight champion of the world. With Spinks holding the ring title, Tyson knocked him to the ground twice in the first 91 seconds of the first round, the second time being one he was unable to recover from, making Tyson the new heavyweight world champion. Tyson was willing to do anything to gain an edge over his opponent. If he knew they weren't doing something, he would do it himself. He said that this was the reason he woke up at 3 in the morning to go on a 4-mile run. He seemed to harness his anger in his training to push him further and supplement his discipline. Mike Tyson famously said, "Discipline is doing what you hate as if it's something you love, and that adversity makes the strong stronger and the weak weaker. It is the stuff that can either build you or cripple you under the pressure. Discipline makes hard men. Every hard man is capable of being a killer, but every killer is not capable of being a hard man. They can't enjoy that much. It's all about the endurance. That's why they become killers, because they can't enjoy the pain. They need to kill to stop it." Tyson became the youngest heavyweight world champion boxer in history after defeating Trevor Berbick in 1986, being only 20 when he achieved this title. He was willing to give up everything to accomplish his goal of becoming the greatest in the world. It was the only focus in his life, saying, if you want it badly enough, you should be willing to sacrifice everything you love that doesn't contribute to the pain, whether that be women or video games. It cannot be a significant part of your life whilst you're climbing to the top.
Talent? I don't believe in talent. Well, some people, they have talent. It's good, it helps when you have talent. As long as you have a lot of determination and willpower, that's all you need. And you have to have the will to win.
Mike Tyson, in his prime, had a grueling training regimen, allegedly consisting of 2,000 sit-ups, 500 to 800 dips, 500 push-ups, and 500 shrugs with a 30-kilogram barbell, along with additional neck training, ring work, and 90 minutes total on an exercise bike. Discipline was all about having the ability to get knocked down and still get back up time after time. This wasn't just in the ring. All his childhood trauma he had to go through didn't end up crippling him like it may have done for many people, but instead built him to be up to deal with increasingly harder challenges, as we would later see, learning to be comfortable in discomfort. Many people might criticize his hardcore approach to training, saying that it is more like self-deprivation than self-discipline, but all that glitters isn't gold. You may see people living the easy life they envy so much, but if you look closer, they are overwhelmed by things like sadness or greed. But through Tyson's discipline, he found purpose. President Eisenhower once said that freedom is the opportunity for self-discipline. Access without self-restraint leads to dysfunction. Mike Tyson's coach, Customato, was responsible for lighting the spark of confidence that he saw in Tyson and turning it into a roaring blaze, giving Mike lots of positive encouragement from his training, not allowing him to put any limits on his potential whatsoever. If people think you can't achieve what you really want, it's only because they don't think that they can achieve their own desires. It's not personal. They just want to put you in the same position that they're in. However, you can't just gain the confidence you need by shouting affirmations in the mirror. It has to be earned through adversity and training. Otherwise, it stays as arrogance. You have to be a champion before you can become one. Train, think, and act like a champion, and then you will slowly become one. Tyson said in an interview, "I'm a dreamer. I have to dream and reach for the stars, and if I miss a star, then I grab a handful of clouds. And the goals that were not achieved were just delusions, so you have to back them up with action to make them reality. Having the will to win, not talent or genetics, but the hunger for your goals to be met. If you have this, no negative in your life will be a disadvantage because none of them matter. You could be poor, short, or ugly. If you have the desire to be the best, you realize that none of it makes a difference. It was always just an obstacle you put in the way, allowing it to become an excuse. Greatness is making your delusions a reality, and if you don't make the sacrifices and put the work in, it will remain a delusion. You need to believe you are here for a purpose to enrich the world. According to Tyson, if you don't believe you can be this person, you won't be that person. There's nothing more supreme than confidence. Confidence breeds success. Success breeds confidence. Apply it properly, and you are unconquerable. Be a doubt annihilator. Kill it every day and fight the negative thoughts every day. His coach believed that boxing was 10% punching and 90% mindset. Tyson was obsessed with his goal of being the best. He realized that material possessions didn't matter. The belts didn't matter. What mattered is that he knew he could beat everybody else. Obsession is often seen in a bad light today, and it can lead down a path of self-destruction. But if your goal really does matter to you, you should have a degree of obsession towards it. As mentioned before, Tyson would study many of the greatest and most powerful leaders and conquerors in history. One of the people he studied was the infamous and controversial book, The Prince, written by Machiavelli, teaching the darker sides of philosophy, using it in a way to gain power through terror and deception to rule and conquer with unwavering strength. One of the quotes in the book states, "Upon this a question arises, whether it be better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved. It may be answered that one should wish for both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved, when of the two, either must be dispensed with." This means the most practical and efficient way to dominate is to do so by using fear instead of love. If your opponent fears you enough, any damage you do to them will not lead to them seeking their vengeance. For Tyson, using fear as a way of psychological warfare and his upcoming opponent paid off massively. His fight with Michael Spinks that ended in a knockout 91 seconds in, as mentioned earlier, was partly due to Spinks literally quaking with fear. Despite being an undefeated reigning champion, he knew the skill that Mike possessed, being described as a scared rabbit that just met the gaze of a huntsman that was aiming a barrel of a shotgun directly at it. Before the fighting had started, you could see his lack of confidence while being announced in the ring, and he even refused to come out of the changing rooms before the fight was meant to begin. He was seen as someone by many experts, including that of Ali, to have a good shot at beating Tyson. But while this may have been true, the lack of confidence from how fearful he was of Mike made it impossible for him to fight at his highest level. Customato said that fear is the greatest obstacle to learning, but fear is your best friend. Fear is like fire. If you learn to control it, you let it work for you. If you don't learn to control it, it will destroy you and everything around you. Recent decades have not seen a man more thoroughly master the tool of fear than Mike Tyson, for it must be noted that men must either be caressed or annihilated. They will revenge themselves for small injuries, but cannot do so for great ones. The injury, therefore, that we do to a man must be such that we need not fear his vengeance. As Machiavelli says, Mike made sure his opponents knew that winning the fight was more important to him than breathing. His only option was to win the fight, and he was willing to die to achieve it. This often decided the outcome of a fight before it had even begun. He would also harness his own fears to drive him to the top of the boxing game. The hero and the coward both feel fear, but the hero has learned to use it, projecting it onto his opponents while the coward runs. Mike understood the power that could be utilized in intimidation, along with the driving force he could tap into from his own fears, whether it be a fear of failure or insecurity. It can be used to your advantage. Tyson's life started to follow a downward spiral with the death of his coach and his ego getting too out of control. He faced many high-profile legal cases that he was unable to win, convicting him of 6 years in prison, although he managed to get out in 3 years and 1 month. The killer mentality he had built up started to leak into ruthlessness, making him more of a loose cannon. He bit off part of an opponent's ear by the name of Evander Holyfield while fighting in the ring in 1997, ending in his disqualification from the match and being suspended from boxing. He started to forget the skill and precision required for boxing and used pure reckless power instead. additionally struggling with issues of addiction, contributing to his eventual retirement from boxing. One of Mike Tyson's most famous quotes was that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Life is unpredictable, and you must be adaptable in the face of challenges. You have to be willing to change with the circumstances and get better with uncertainty, developing what Nassim Taleb called the state of being anti-fragile. And this is what Mike did. Like a phoenix rising from his ashes, he developed a better understanding of the world. In prison, he studied many philosophical works, such as that of Buddhism, Taoism, and Islam, helping him cultivate inner peace, contributing to his redemption. He stated that sometimes the fire that burns you can also light your way. As he confronted his past and worked to overcome the personal issues he had struggled with, he emerged from it all a better person. He started to embrace what Friedrich Nietzsche would call his Dionysian side, being the part of yourself that you often suppress for fear of being vulnerable or getting you into trouble. However, it is far more effective to properly make it a part of yourself rather than shy away from it. He did so by embracing his darker side and chaotic impulses as he got older, being able to talk and laugh about them, recognizing that they were just a part of who he is, making him a stronger and more passionate person. And that at its core, life was all about loss. We lose fights, people, hair, and finally, our lives. But we are able to learn from these losses. And Tyson says that despite this, even at life's lowest points, it's still beautiful, emphasizing the importance to be grateful for everything, live for the day, and enjoy the moment, thinking about nothing else but the moment. That is happiness. People think happiness is like celebration, excitement, energy, and joy, but it isn't always. He discovered that the purpose of life was to love something greater than yourself. Otherwise, you aren't properly living. And if you live life without getting to properly know yourself, you wasted the life you were given. Many tests along the way, in the form of negative experiences, to see how well you face adversity. Whilst he let his ego become too inflated in his early career and made many questionable decisions, they were all necessary parts of getting to know himself, having no emotion on top, being someone people dream to become.